February 25th, 2026. A podcast studio in London. Gareth Bale is sitting with Gary Neville, Roy Keane, Paul Scholes, Jill Scott, and Ian Wright. He is 36 years old. He retired 3 years ago, and he is about to say something that he never said publicly during 15 years of professional football. Neville asks about the injuries. The calf injuries specifically, the ones that defined how the football world talked about Bale for over a decade. The ones that cost him match after match at Real Madrid. The ones that led to the most famous joke in Spanish football at Bale Calves, a Twitter account dedicated entirely to his latest muscle setback, at one point with 36,000 followers. Bale pauses, and then he says this. I tore my disc in my back when I was 18 at Tottenham. I played my whole career with that. I had a lot of calf injuries, which was due to my back. I never came out and said this when I was playing because some people would say he's making excuses. Read that again. He tore a disc in his back at 18 years old. He played for 15 more years with a torn disc pressing on a nerve that could trigger a calf injury at any moment, including, he would later confirm, while brushing his teeth. He never told anyone, not because he didn't know, because he decided the judgment for being fragile was easier to carry than the judgment for making excuses. This video is not a defense of Gareth Bale. It is a question about what happens when we spend 15 years judging an athlete without the information that would have changed every single one of those judgments. To understand what Bale was choosing to carry and what he was choosing not to say, you need to understand the specific weight of the public narrative that followed him from about 2014 onwards. At Tottenham, Bale had been extraordinary. In the 2012-13 season, he was named PFA Players Player of the Year, voted the best player in the Premier League by his peers. He scored 26 goals in 44 appearances. He was direct, unstoppable, arguably the most exciting player in English football. When Real Madrid paid £85 million for him in September 2013, at the time the most expensive transfer in football history, the fee felt, if anything, like it might undervalue him. And then the narrative shifted. It did not shift because his talent disappeared. It shifted because his body kept breaking down. Season after season at Real Madrid, the same pattern. Months of Bale playing well, then a calf injury, then weeks of rehabilitation, then a return, then another calf injury. The Spanish press, particularly Marca and AS, charted each absence with increasing skepticism. The coverage evolved from injury update to character question. Was Bale motivated? Was he prioritizing golf over football? Was he manufacturing reasons to miss games he didn't want to play? The @BaleCavs Twitter account, 36,000 followers, posting real-time updates on his latest muscle setback, was the purest expression of how the football world had categorized him. Not a player managing a career-threatening condition. A fragile, unreliable, possibly uncommitted, expensive disappointment. The BBC documented the picture precisely. From 2014 to 2022, Bale missed over 100 games for Real Madrid through injury. The vast majority were calf or soleus-related. And across all of that, across 100 missed games and the Twitter account and the markaback pages and the ex-players on television calling his commitment into question, Bale said nothing. He knew why his calves kept going. He had known since he was 18. He chose silence. The injury happened during the 2006-07 season at Tottenham, in his first full year as a professional. Bale was 18 years old. He tore a disc in his lower back. The disc, under certain movements or physical stress, pressed against the nerve root that ran down into the muscles of his calf and soleus, creating a direct biomechanical link between his back condition and every subsequent calf injury he would suffer. The medical reality of this condition is specific. A herniated or torn lumbar disc affecting the sciatic nerve can cause referred pain, weakness, and, critically, sudden, uncontrollable muscle tears in the lower leg. The patient cannot feel it coming. The nerve fires, the muscle contracts suddenly, and the tissue tears. I never knew when it would come, Bale confirmed on the podcast. And obviously people were like, oh, he doesn't look after himself. I would literally make sure my calves and soleus were bulletproof. But again, if it misfires and it goes, there's nothing I could do about it. He managed it, methodically, obsessively. His daily routine was structured around the knowledge that any sudden movement, a sprint, a change of direction, a misplaced step, could trigger the nerve and tear the muscle. He went to extraordinary lengths to protect himself, even standing on his heels whilst brushing his teeth to minimize the risk of triggering a calf problem. Read that sentence slowly. Standing on his heels while brushing his teeth. Not running at pace, not sprinting down a left wing, not changing direction to beat a defender. Brushing his teeth. And even in that moment, the management protocol was active. When the injury came anyway, as it did repeatedly because a torn disc pressing on a nerve does not care how carefully you brush your teeth, he had nothing left to do but take the injection and start again. I'd have an injection in my back to calm it all down. And then he went back on the pitch. And the coverage the next time he went down called it fragility, called it lack of dedication, called it prioritizing golf. Here is the question that the podcast reveal forces us to ask. Why did Bale not tell anyone? He said it directly. I never came out and said this when I was playing because some people would say, he's making excuses. That answer is psychologically precise. Bale understood that in elite professional football, particularly at a club like Real Madrid, with a fan base and media culture built around demanding maximum availability from its most expensive players, the calculus around injury revelations is not straightforward. If you reveal a structural condition, two outcomes are possible. In the best case, it generates sympathy and reframes the narrative. In the worst case, it generates skepticism, a suspicion that the revelation is timed to deflect responsibility, to preemptively excuse future absences, to manufacture protection against the criticism that would come next time the calf went again. Bale looked at those two outcomes and chose neither. He chose a third option. Say nothing, absorb the criticism, be called lazy and uncommitted and a fraud, and protect himself from the accusation of excuse-making by simply never making the excuse. That is not the decision of someone who doesn't understand the environment they're operating in. It is the decision of someone who understands it extremely well, who has calculated the risks on both sides and concluded that silence, for all its cost, is the option with the fewest consequences he cannot control. The cost was 15 years of being called something he wasn't. He decided that was preferable to being called something else. Let's be specific about what the public narrative around Bale's injuries actually looked like, because it was not occasional or mild. When Bale was left out of Real Madrid's matchday squad for what the club described as a calf injury in January 2019, the front page of Marca featured a headline that translated as, "Bale, another one." The implication was not medical. It was character. Former Spanish international Predrag Mijatovic, who had worked in Real Madrid's footballing structure, said publicly that Bale had a bad relationship with pain. The phrasing was designed to be read as a character assessment, not a medical opinion. Various Spanish football journalists and television programs, notably El Chiringuito, Spain's most-watched football talk show, spent segments regularly debating whether Bale was really injured or whether the injuries were convenient. The most extreme version of this narrative, he injured himself deliberately to avoid playing in games he didn't want to feature in for a club whose fan base had turned against him. There was never any evidence for this. But the evidence against it, the torn disc, the nerve compression, the involuntary calf tears that a biomechanical specialist could have explained in 3 sentences, was information only Bale, his medical team, and his closest family held. The public conversation was happening entirely without the most relevant fact. And the man who held that fact said nothing. Every time. For 15 years. The irony at the heart of this story is that while the public narrative described a player who didn't look after himself, Bale was engaged in one of the most intensive self-management programs in professional football. I would literally make sure my calves and soleus were bulletproof. He wasn't dismissing the injury risk. He was obsessing over it. Daily physiotherapy. Specific exercise protocols designed to maintain muscle strength without triggering the nerve. Regime modifications, including standing on his heels while brushing his teeth, that turned even the most mundane moments of his daily life into managed exercises. When the injury came despite all of that, which it regularly did, because a torn disc pressing on a nerve does not respond to preparation in the way a muscle injury does, his response was never to stop. It was manageable, but over time it caught up with me, he said. The language of someone who has been managing for years and knows exactly what managing costs. What Bale was doing for 15 years was performing at the highest level of professional football while sustaining a condition that made sustained performance at the highest level of professional football genuinely extraordinary. He won 5 Champions League titles at Real Madrid. He scored in 2 Champions League finals, including the 64th minute overhead kick against Liverpool in Kiev in 2018, which every objective analyst of the game has described as one of the great individual moments in Champions League final history. He scored those goals while managing a torn disc, while standing on his heels while brushing his teeth, while knowing that any session, any sprint, any change of direction could be the one that fired the nerve and ended the next 6 weeks. And the criticism, through all of it, kept describing a player who didn't try hard enough. I felt like I achieved everything I wanted to. "The last thing I did was qualify for a World Cup, which was the one thing that was last on my list." That sentence, "the last thing on my list," is the sentence that unlocks the retirement story. Because Bale's retirement in January 2023 was read by most of the football world through the lens of the injury narrative. He couldn't continue physically. The body finally gave out. The torn disc caught up with him. The reality, as he described it, was different. He had finished the list. Wales had qualified for the 2022 World Cup, their first in 64 years, on the back of Bale scoring the goal against Ukraine. That secured the playoff victory. He had been there. He had delivered the thing that the country had been waiting for across 6 decades. When he arrived in Qatar, he was 33 years old, managing a condition that had been managed for 15 years. He scored against the United States in the group stage. He played through the tournament. Wales were eliminated in the group stage, but Bale had done what he went there to do. He retired 4 months later. A family illness also influenced the timing, but the sporting logic was clear. The list was complete. Bale had known for some time, he confirmed, that the 2022 World Cup would be the end. Not because the body gave out, though it was giving out, but because he had arrived at the place he had been building toward since he was a teenager at Southampton. The World Cup appearance was not a footnote. It was the destination. Everything else, 5 Champions Leagues, the overhead kick, 2 Champions League finals, Euro 2016 semi-final, 111 caps, Wales' all-time leading scorer, was the journey. The torn disc was there for all of it. The Stick to Football podcast moment has a specific texture that most summaries of it don't capture. When Bale says, "I never came out and said this when I was playing because some people would say he's making excuses," he doesn't say it with anger. He doesn't say it with bitterness toward the critics, or toward the journalists at Marca, or toward the @BaleCavs Twitter account, or toward any specific person who called him fragile or uncommitted, or a fraud. He says it with the matter-of-fact calm of someone who made a decision a long time ago and has no particular need to relitigate it now. He made his calculation. He lived with the consequences. The consequences were considerable. 15 years of public mischaracterization, of a reputation damaged in ways that were never accurate, of being one of the most misunderstood athletes in his generation. And on the podcast in February 2026, with Roy Keane sitting across from him, he explains it simply. He didn't want to be the player who made excuses. Roy Keane's response to the revelation is the moment that, in a film, would carry the scene. Keane, who spent his entire career holding teammates to a standard he described as the minimum, said nothing for a beat. And then, that's class. Not, "You should have told people." Not, "That explains everything." Just, "That's class." From Roy Keane, who spent his career being intolerant of anything less than maximum effort and maximum honesty, "That's class," is not a polite response. It's a verdict. Go back to where we started. February 25th, 2026. The podcast. The pause before Bale says what he never said. The torn disc was not a secret kept from the football world out of arrogance or calculation or PR management. It was kept because Bale made a specific, considered choice about what kind of athlete he wanted to be in public, and decided that the one who makes excuses was worse than the one who seems fragile. For 15 years, the football world judged him on the second characterization. The criticism was specific, sustained, and consequential. It shaped his reputation at Real Madrid, contributed to the fractured relationship with the fan base there, and followed him through every career stage. And none of it had the information that would have changed all of it. The question this story leaves, the one it is genuinely difficult to resolve, is not about Bale. It is about the frameworks we use to judge athletes when we have partial information. We knew Bale was missing games. We knew the reason given was calf injuries. We knew he played golf. We concluded, character problem. Lack of dedication. Doesn't look after himself. The framework worked on the information we had. It produced the wrong answer. Not because the framework was stupid. It produced reasonable conclusions from observable evidence. But because the observable evidence was incomplete. Because a man had decided to carry his disc privately rather than offer the world an explanation it might not have believed anyway. He was standing on his heels while brushing his teeth. He was having injections in his back to calm the nerve down. He was managing a torn disc for 15 years while winning 5 Champions Leagues and qualifying Wales for their first World Cup in 64 years. We didn't know. He decided we shouldn't. Here is what I want you to think about. Bale's decision to stay silent was made in the knowledge that people would judge him badly for the absences without having the information that explained them. He considered telling people. He decided it would be taken as excuse-making. So he said nothing. and absorb the judgment instead. Was that the right decision? And more broadly, how often are we judging athletes, colleagues, or people in our own lives on incomplete information? And how often does the person with the full picture choose not to share it for exactly the reasons Bale described? Tell me what you think in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether you think he was right to stay silent.